On today's episode, you'll be watching the finale of our series that's taken us through the Defiance Zoo in Tacoma, Washington. So far, we've covered an exhibit that rotates multiple species from Southeast Asia. Not one, but two aquarium buildings. The rocky shores of Pacific waters, and that leaves us with two more attractions to go before we do anything. If you are new and like getting free virtual visits to zoos, consider pressing those sub and bell buttons to officially join our zoo crew. Then, as always, I would like all of you to comment below what is an animal that looked completely different than what you imagined when you finally saw it in person. The unforgiving tundra. The actual one, not this one. One of the driest places on Earth, with frost-molded landscapes, little precipitation, poor nutrients, and short seasons. However, it is, most of the time, the perfect paradise for polar bears. So right off the bat, I'll point out that Defiance doesn't have the most modern looking habitat, but it's kind of special for a couple of reasons. This was awarded the AZA Exhibit Award in 1982. This is an example of another award-winning polar bear exhibit in Detroit that opened in the early 2000s, which overall is 8 times bigger. So for context, up until, sadly, relatively recently, it was common to put ice bears in the pit of doom. So when a zoo goes from this to this over 40 years ago, it definitely turned some heads. In fact, I hear that the director of the nearby Woodland Park Zoo at the time said that this was one of the best and most inspirational exhibits in the world. On our last adventure, I casually mentioned that it's a miracle that the zoo still has walruses. Well, I could pretty much say the same thing about their polar bears. They're not easy to breed and are starting to become in short supply themselves. When their last bear passed in 2022, the zoo community was a little worried that Defiance wouldn't find any more after caring for polar bears for 80 years. But actually, we had nothing to worry about, because twin sisters Astra and Lerke moved to Washington from Detroit in 2023. And hopefully for many more years to come, you will be able to see not just an amazing animal up close, but also the zoo's icon. Speaking of Detroit, one last time, I noticed the surroundings of Defiance's Arctic tundra are similar to the Detroit Zoo's Arctic Ring of Life. Both pathways are fenced in by mounds on both sides of you, and does a great job at hiding and blending the unnatural elements around them. The pathway on the Ring of Life features a shelter made of whale and other Inuit structures. The tundra's pathway features multiple games to keep the kids occupied in between exhibits. Unlike Detroit, though, this zoo did not phase out their Arctic foxes. This is Fen and Freya. If you visit them during warmer weather, their fur should be gray. Visit them when it's colder and their coat should be as white as snow. Or when it's mild out, you might see them like this. Arctic foxes are often naturally found in the treeless taiga of Arctic Eurasia and North America, and sometimes people's homes, apparently. Before Sven came to Tacoma, he came from a rescue and rehabilitation center, and before that, in private care in Oklahoma, where it is illegal to own an Arctic fox. Okay, I still can't get it out of my head either. If you're still wondering how this won an exhibit award, I should have shown you earlier that it didn't have all that extra fencing, because without it, you would be able to see more clearly there are two very large exhibits in the distance behind it, creating the illusion that predator and prey share the same space. Back in the day, I think that one that we just saw displayed reindeer. Now, both of these beautiful hills are home to the channel's very first and possibly the very last Umi mock, which basically translates to the animal with skin like a beard, also known as the Muskox, shaggy survivors of the Ice Age. Despite their name, they are actually more closely related to sheep and goats than they are to actual oxen. Their genus name actually means sheep ox. Now, please do not judge me, or go ahead, because it's kind of funny. There's a reason why I asked you that question at the beginning. I don't know or didn't know anything about the growth and development of musk oxen, so when I hear that they had a baby a year before my visit, I thought that this was the baby. Because, you know, some animals grow pretty fast. This is Hudson, a full-grown bull that weighs about 750 pounds. Turns out, I just thought musk oxen would be bigger. Apparently, males only grow about 5 feet tall at the shoulder, females are a little smaller. I guess I expected them to be like bison-sized, which is at least another foot or two taller. Now, this is the calf. In 2023, Hudson and Charlotte gave us Willow, named after her parents' favorite food. In case you don't make zoos your personality and are a little out of the loop, her birth was a huge deal. From what I've heard, musk oxen are not easy to take care of. Imagine having fur that's all over your body, but now imagine that it has 2 layers and a lot of it is over 3 feet long, the longest and one of the warmest fur of any animal. So naturally, heat is their enemy, that and wolves. According to the Minnesota Zoo, which we'll actually see pretty soon, they had to phase the species out because the state has become too warm for them, leaving Point Defiance with the last remaining zoo in the mainland US with this beautiful bovid. But it gets better. The zoo has reported that Willow has been weaned, but is still too small to be around Hudson. However, this is a social species and he can't be alone forever. So while Charlotte goes back and forth between her mate and her baby, a few weeks ago, the Arctic Tundra welcomed Pretzel from a research facility in Alaska to be Willow's companion. And the plan is to eventually have all 4 musk oxen share the same space. I haven't really done it on this series so far, but every now and then I'll talk about a zoo's conservation work so you know what you're supporting when you visit. We saw on the last episode that Point Defiance is one of several places that plays refuge to rescued sea otters and sea lions. They also run a society called the Dr. Holly Reed Wildlife Conservation Fund that's provided millions of dollars in grants to projects that work to save sea turtles, polar bears, and several gems from Southeast Asia. However, you can actually see the conservation work being done at the Red Wolf Woods, one of the greatest conservation-focused projects I have ever seen, and I don't know where to begin. From the plethora of signage that shows off the wolf's anatomy, other wild canids' anatomy, tracking equipment, and where they used to live in the past. Then you have the timeline of the zoo's conservation work with the species, which I'll get into in a second, to not 1, but 2 gorgeous enclosures, the best in the zoo in my opinion. All of this opened in 2010, but the zoo has worked with the species since the 70s. Before Europeans came over, they covered ground from New York to Texas. But by the 70s, there were only 14 or 17, depending on who you ask, pure red wolves left in the wild. And it was the Point Defiant Zoo that rounded them up and began a breeding program, what would later become an award-winning breeding program. While several wolves have been released back into the North Carolina woods over the years, they still interbreed with coyotes, and hunters still mistake them for coyotes, and the latest reports from the Wolf Conservation Center say only 16 remain in the wild. On a positive note though, the zoo says there are 270 red wolves in human care in 50 institutions, and nearly 50 of them live at the zoo's own off-site breeding facility. And they still are determined to prepare a lot of them for life on their own to boost up their numbers in the wild. And that, ladies and gents, bulls and cows, will conclude this series of tours of the Point Defiant Zoo and Aquarium. Unless, of course, they can come up with something new relatively soon. As I've said before, and I'll say it again, even though it's not even 30 acres big, it still has animals that you'd want to see, some that you didn't even know that you wanted to see, and it really just has the same heart, feel, and effort that bigger zoos have. And I can't say it enough that Point Defiance should definitely be on your bucket list. So I guess with that, this is where I'll leave us for now. Please make sure you go to the comments below for a special announcement, and as always, please stay tuned for the next episode. Stay wild, and thank you all for watching Zoo Tours.